And before I talk to you, Joyce, about the Colorado matter, I just want to ask you something that I was just talking to Craig about, Andrew, whether Jack Smith has these Michigan tapes or whether you think he's got them, because both the January 6th indictment and the Georgia indictment make plenty of references to this kind of stuff that was going on in various states around the country. So does somebody other than folks in Detroit have these tapes?
I don't know the answer to that, but there's an easy mechanism for him to get it, which is a grand jury subpoena. So if he doesn't have it already, he certainly can get his hands on it. As people have been noting, these allegations, if true, would constitute potential state crimes, both bribing and also receiving a bribe are potential state crimes, but there also are potential federal crimes along the lines that Jack Smith has already charged with respect to Donald Trump. But there are other people involved in this scheme who could be charged and the subject of criminal investigation. So he has ample authority to continue investigating. And he or Michigan may, if they can prove this up and they are tape recordings, could use these tapes to bring state or federal charges.
And actually, Joyce, they also seem to fit into the Georgia case, in which case it's all part of a conspiracy. There are so many examples of this, including very specific examples about Michigan, about the conversations that were going on between people on the inside of Donald Trump's circle who were devising this plan to overcome the election. So I would imagine that this new piece of information could fit very nicely into that case.
I think that's right. There will be subpoenas all around for sure if there are prosecutors who don't already have their hands on these tapes. And to your point about how good this evidence is, just think about how granular this shows Trump's involvement was. This is the president of the United States making phone calls to county officials in Wayne County, Michigan, in the wake of this election. And if you're a prosecutor and you're looking to show that Trump was aware of and deeply involved in this scheme to obstruct the certification of the vote and to take the steps that happened on January 6th, then this is a great piece of evidence to put in front of the jury. You know, we knew about this conversation earlier. It was reported. The great thing is there's no need now to ask a jury to trust a witness's recollection of what was said on the call. You just press play.
Yeah, the granularity is something. I mean, it was weird to a lot of Americans that Donald Trump was phoning the Secretary of State of Georgia, Brad Raffensperger. Now he's calling county chairs. I mean, where does this stop? Joyce, let me ask you about the Colorado case. You heard Judge Ludig saying Supreme Court could take it. Supreme Court could say this is Colorado's decision and it's with them. What do you think happens?
Yeah, I think this is a tough one to call. But the problem here, if the Supreme Court doesn't take it, is that you could end up with a patchwork quilt of states across the country making different rulings as to whether or not the former president could be on the ballot. And so I've heard Andrew express this same view. I tend to think that the court will find some sort of a procedural off-ramp that lets them make a finding that Trump can't be excluded from the ballot. Perhaps it will be that he didn't get sufficient process early on in the Colorado proceedings. You know, even with that, though, there's this delay issue that goes on. Anytime you have these sort of rulings, Trump will certainly wait until the last minute that he can to go to the Supreme Court in an effort to further delay proceedings. And that's really the whole game here. Even with the immunity case, for instance, if the Supreme Court defers and lets the Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia proceed, the real prospect for delay is that after the Court of Appeals rules, even if it is speedy, Trump has 90 days to file a request for certiorari. He's got 45 days to ask the D.C. Court of Appeals to rehear the case en banc. So at every step of the way in these appellate proceedings in front of a Court of Appeals or the Supreme Court, there's more built-in delay that has the potential to move all of these events further back.
Andrew, as people who like to read these things, it's a 68-page decision. One of the things they really get into is whether or not Donald Trump was involved in an insurrection. They don't dodge that topic. If in the political world, what you're hearing from a lot of Republicans is that this is not a fair ruling because there's been no evidence that Donald Trump, or there's been no determination by a court that Donald Trump participated in insurrection. The Supreme Court of Colorado says there is, and he did.
Yeah, that is sort of an odd critique. I can understand the critique, which is there hasn't been a criminal conviction for insurrection. And indeed, Donald Trump has not been charged with insurrection. But there's nothing in the constitutional provision itself that requires a criminal charge, let alone a conviction. And so there has been a trial in this case. There was a hearing. Donald Trump was afforded the opportunity to put on evidence and to testify. And one of the remarkable things about not just the district court finding, but the Supreme Court finding in Colorado is you don't have any of the 7 justices really disagreeing on that factual determination.
Right.
Nobody is saying, oh, you know what? He didn't really do this. And this sort of relates to the discussion you were having with the new reporting, which is there is just ample proof. This is, as Joyce would say, this is sort of a rock crusher of a case against the former president for insurrection.
Thanks to both of you, as always, for your analysis. Andrew Weissmann and Joyce Vance. Always appreciate you kicking us off.